Okay, welcome back, class, to another session here in talking about teaching listening and speaking to foreign students. In particular, this is for language arts study. Today we're going to be ending up here talking about how we test students and how we monitor their progress particularly with emphasis to listening and speaking. So we're going to talk a little bit about monitoring progress. We'll talk a little bit about listening and speaking tests for second language learners. The first, and in my opinion most important element of this little lecture here is talking about monitoring progress. At least a decade ago, when I was in the process of developing some software, I had done interviews with teachers and asked them, what's the most important thing that you want in an online digital environment for teaching your kids? And their number one answer was progress monitoring system. And so they wanted a way to see the progress of how students were learning. Nation, in his text, Teaching EFL Learners Listening and Speaking, talks about the same thing, the need for teachers to develop a data collection and analysis system. He talked about having checklists, for example, and as you see or notice a student performing a particular task or ability or use a particular skill set or linguistic element, that you would check that off the list. In other words, they can do that themselves. So he recommends creating a checklist of things. You've got 100 things that you want to get done in a semester, and you check them off as you go for each student. That is quite a task, but that's a good way of keeping an eye on what is going on, keeping an eye on the progress of a particular student. You can also do a student self-check. It's an excellent way not only to find out if the students know what their ability is, but it forces them to do some metacognitive analysis of their own language ability. It encourages them to analyze their own language ability, which is a big plus because you're now getting them to try to notice more. And again, we talked about the importance of noticing. When somebody knows something and they do it well, you cross it off the list. Hey, I know this, so I'm just going to cross that off. I know that I've mastered that. You'll cross it off the list. The other thing that Nation would suggest is that we being teachers, perform regular testing to find out about all these individual elements that we're dealing with. It's funny when you're talking about a curriculum and you're dealing with this big overarching scope and sequence, but at some point you have to get down to the nitty-gritty and look at all those little things. Nation recommends doing things what I would consider the older-fashioned way. There are digital options where you can have things checked off or have things determined because of some digital program that's out there. I want to show you two things here. One is from a system that I use. You guys know this Tuzi.net stuff. And when I was working with when I was working with other teachers in a variety of places, we started developing a question bank. And these are the top, the top 2,000 words. Actually, this particular level only has 750. But these are the top 750 words. And we created questions for each one of them. So the word descend or the word envelope. And we have a question developed for that particular word, and that was all put into the question bank. We have a total of about 3,000 of these words, and for each question that you put on a particular test, you can analyze how many people have taken this question, how many people have got it right, how many people got it wrong, who is that particular person. So instead of doing it the manual way, which is obviously a good tried and true system, you can allow the computer to do some of the work, provided you put in the data, you put in the questions. You can now track whatever your students are doing, and that's an excellent way to find out what your students are doing, what they know, and what they don't know. Now, as you all know, I'm getting more into podcasting. And I mentioned at a recent conference the idea about flipping the classroom, where you listen to the podcast first, and then later on you actually do the interaction and or the testing. Part of this idea comes from this guy, Salman Khan, who is the originator of the Khan Academy. a great site that is now growing into a very strong educational paradigm shifting application. He was in no way involved in application. This sort of just fell into his lap, although it's very logical, and we're very glad for what he's doing. Here he is at the TED conference last year, and he's talking about not only his system, his site, but he's talking about going beyond just videos. And because, again, he's got all these videos, but now the question is, okay, now what can I do with this to actually help and or manage learning? And I do hope you take a good listen to this as he talks about the benefits of an analysis system that's digital.
The question is, how do we take this to the next level? How do we take what those teachers were doing to their natural conclusion? And so what I'm showing over here, these are actual exercises that I started writing for my cousins. The ones I started were much more primitive. This is a kind of a more competent version of it. But the paradigm here is we'll generate as many questions as you need until you get that concept, until you get 10 in a row. And the Khan Academy videos are there. You get hints, the actual steps for that problem if you don't know how to do it. But the paradigm here, it seems like a very simple thing, 10 in a row, you move on. But it's fundamentally different than what's happening in classrooms right now. In a traditional classroom, you have a couple of homework, lecture, and then you have a snapshot exam. And that exam, whether you get a 70%, an 80%, a 90%, or a 95%, the class moves on to the next topic. And even that 95% student, what was the 5% they didn't know? Maybe they didn't know what happens when you raise something to the 0th power. And then you go build on that in the next concept. That's analogous to imagine learning to ride a bicycle. And I give you a bicycle, maybe I give you a lecture ahead of time, and I give you that bicycle for 2 weeks, and then I come back after 2 weeks, and I say, well, let's see, you're having trouble taking left turns, you can't quite stop, you're an 80% bicyclist. So I put a big C stamp on your forehead, and then I say, here's a unicycle. But as ridiculous as that sounds, that's exactly what's happening in our classrooms right now. And the idea is, you fast forward and good students start failing algebra all of a sudden and start failing calculus all of a sudden, despite being smart, despite having good teachers, and it's usually because they had these Swiss cheese gaps that kept building throughout their foundation. So our model is learn math the way you would learn anything, like the way you would learn a bicycle. Stay on that bicycle. Fall off that bicycle. Do it as long as necessary until you have mastery. The traditional model, it penalizes you for experimentation and failure, but it does not expect mastery. We encourage you to experiment. We encourage you to failure, but we do expect mastery. This is just another one of the modules. This is trigonometry. This is shifting and reflecting functions. And they all fit together. We have about 90 of these right now. And you could go to the site right now. It's all free, not trying to sell anything. But the general idea is that they all fit into this knowledge map. That top node right there, that's literally single-digit addition. It's like 1 + 1 is equal to 2. And the paradigm is once you get 10 in a row on that, then it keeps forwarding you to more and more advanced modules. So if you keep this further down the knowledge map, we're getting into more advanced arithmetic. Further down, you start getting into pre-algebra and early algebra. Further down, you start getting into algebra 1, algebra 2, a little bit of pre-calculus. And the idea is from this, we can actually teach everything. Well, everything that can be taught in this type of a framework. So you can imagine, and this is what we are working on, is from this knowledge map, you have logic, you have computer programming, you have grammar, you have genetics, all based off of that core of, okay, if you know this and that, now you're ready for this next concept. Now, that can work well for an individual learner, and I encourage for you to do it with your kids, but I also encourage everyone in the audience to do it yourself. It'll change what happens at the dinner table. But what we want to do is use the natural conclusion of the flipping of the classroom that those early teachers had emailed me about. And so what I'm showing you here, this is actually data from a pilot in the Los Altos School District where they took 2 5th grade classes and 2 7th grade classes and completely gutted their old math curriculum. These kids aren't using textbooks, they're not getting one-size-fits-all lectures, they're doing Khan Academy, they're doing that software for roughly half of their math class. And I want to make it clear, we don't view this as the complete math education. What it does is, and this is what's happening in Los Altos, it frees up time. This is the blocking and tackling, making sure you know how to do the system of equations, and it frees up time for the simulations, for the games, for the mechanics, for the robot building, for the estimating how high that hill is based on its shadow. And so the paradigm is the teacher walks in every day, Every kid works at their own pace, and a teacher this is actually a live dashboard from Los Altos School District, and they look at this dashboard. Every row is a student, every column is one of those concepts. Green means the student's already proficient, blue means that they're working on it, no need to worry, red means they're stuck. And what the teacher does is literally just says, let me intervene on the red kids. Or even better, let me get one of the green kids who are already proficient in that concept to be the first line of attack and actually tutor their peer. Now, I kind of come from a very data-centric reality, so we don't want that teacher to even go and intervene and have to ask the kid awkward questions. Oh, what do you not understand, or what do you do understand, and all of the rest. So our paradigm is to really arm the teachers with as much data as possible, really data that in almost any other field is expected if you're in finance or marketing or manufacturing, and so the teachers can actually diagnose what's wrong with the students so that they can make their interaction as productive as possible. So now the teachers know exactly what the students have been up to, how long they've been spending every day, what videos have they been watching, when did they pause the videos, what did they stop watching, what exercises are they using. What have they been focused on? The outer circle shows what the exercises they're focused on. The inner circle shows the videos they're focused on. And the data gets pretty granular, so you can actually see the exact problems that the student got right or wrong. Red is wrong, blue is right. The leftmost question is the first question that the student attempted. They watched the video right over there. And then you could see...
All right. I wanted to show you this just to have you recognize, look at what can be done if we can automate the system. I don't know if anybody is doing it. If you guys are interested, boy, wouldn't that be an awesome tool to have as you're trying to teach students the basics or the high frequency vocabulary, and you can go through a system where you can actually see them in digital form, what they've been practicing with, what they know, what they're having trouble with. It would be a great thing to have. It's becoming, some of these tools are becoming available, but nothing like what's being done at Khan Academy and mathematics. My goal, my vision would be to see this same type of thing happen for ESL. Anyway, that's the whole idea here with regard to monitoring the progress of the students. And the more detailed you can get, the more detailed information, of course, the better it's going to be for the student and for you. Let's move on to testing listening. Nation focuses on two primary areas, reliability and validity. He also does talk a little bit about practicality. But these are scientific terms used in research and analysis. You don't typically find these when you're talking about testing someone, but they are used for people who are actually doing research and testing in many different areas. Reliability has to do with the fact that the test that you are giving is going to give the same score over and over and over again. The test is reliable. And so in this section, he's talking about giving a listening test. And the test that you're giving is going to be more reliable if they are recorded, which kind of makes sense because you're hearing the exact same thing over and over again. There's no emphasis, there's no mistake, there's no slur in the second attempt because it's recorded. So a test is going to be more reliable if it's recorded. It'll be more reliable if there are multiple attempts to measure listening. It's going to be more reliable if you can offer 50 questions or three different sets of questions as opposed to just one set or 10 questions. It's also going to be more reliable if students are familiar with the format of the test, which is often why they give you some sample questions or sample practice so that you become familiar with the test. Those are some of the reliability issues that he's going to be talking about, that he talked about. Validity is another test. And validity has to do with whether the test is actually measuring what it's intended to measure. I believe you guys can understand. You can make a test, and it's a grammar test, but all of the vocabulary is in the 5,000 and 6,000 frequency range, and your students are going to fail all the questions because they don't know the vocabulary. So just because it's a test, it doesn't mean it's a valid test. There are a variety of types of concepts with regard to validity. The two that he talks about, one is face validity, and that basically means, does it appear to actually be a good test? Does it appear to actually be testing what it's intended to? The typical one that I often talk about is the C test, and you probably have never heard of the C test. The C test is kind of like a cloze. The only difference is that it's not an entire word that you're missing, but it's every second half of every nth word. For example, every fifth word, the second half of that word is missing. And to be honest, a true C test, I believe, is every other word that's missing. But it's an actual test that's a reliable indicator of one's language proficiency. But most people, at least in the research community that I have read, their students did not think the test was an actual language test. They all complained and said this is just a spelling test. When in fact, as far as reliability, it reliably indicated what students' language abilities were. So it was reliable, but it didn't have face validity, so people did not want to take it. They did not believe that it was actually good. That's what face validity is all about. And then, of course, there's content validity, and that's asking the question whether the content in the test is actually testing the skills that the test is intending to test. So again, the content may be good, but it's not actually testing what you hope it does. That's content validity. Some issues that you want to consider when you're developing tests. Lastly, Nation talks about the practicality of tests. Is it practical in terms of money? Is it too expensive for you to use? Is it time consuming? Is it going to take an hour to do the test? And maybe you can find another one that's shorter, or maybe you don't have an hour in a session to do a test. Is it labor intensive? Does it take a lot of work to develop? So, for example, if we go back and look at, well, here's actually one word here, the cloze test. There are people, well, in the past anyway, they didn't want to do a cloze test, even though it was a good test. It was a good indicator. It was inexpensive, but it was very labor intensive to create a cloze. Nowadays, that's not going to be the problem. How is the ease of use? The ease of use according to the student as far as taking the test, the ease of use according to the administrator, the test giver, the teacher, in terms of developing, delivering, correcting, and returning a test. If it's not easy to use, teachers are going to be less happy trying to take advantage of it. Lastly, with regard to testing, is there any good washback? Students get their scores back, and does it impact what they're learning? Does it impact how they're speaking? Does it impact how they're listening? Is there positive washback? Tests that do not have washback are probably less desirous because it's going to be less helpful for the students. There are some listening tests that were listed in the text that we're looking at: dictation, information transfer, closes, true, false opinion, which is basically 3 options. It's not just true or false, but it's someone's opinion. I've added TPR as a listening test. Obviously, you want to do that not in groups, but you can use that as a way to verify students understand what's going on, at least in some parts of lower level type testing. So those are listening tests. Some speaking tests that Nation talks about are interviewing with scales. And that's just a basic interview where a student sits down and you talk to them and you let them speak and you grade them on a grading scale, 1 to 5, 1 to 10. You grade them on pronunciation and diction and grammar and vocab usage. You could also use checklists if you want to be more specific. For example, you've been working with the past tense, and you have a list of, a bunch of irregular verbs that you want the students to be able to understand, or you have a bunch of speaking activity you want to be able to have the students actually say, I'm sorry, can you repeat that again? Some conversation control strategies that you gave them, and are they actually doing them? And if they are, you can check those off. Also talked about group oral exams. Another test that I have actually used is the describe and draw. Someone in the class is describing, and the students who are not watching or seeing they have to listen and then draw it. You have a conversational cloze, which is basically a cloze, only it's a cloze of a conversation. So the vocabulary and the grammar might be a little different. The students need to figure out what's going on with regard to the conversation. They do still need to write those things down. You can have multiple choice speaking tests. That's similar to the old TOEFL type of tests where there was speaking going on and then you had to answer A, B, C, or D for the answer. Imitations and role plays. There are other types of speaking tests that you can do. The interview is probably the one that's the most common. That way it'll allow you to test specific elements. But imitations, role plays, presentations, speeches, and then just free conversation type of things that you can use for testing. It's always better to have specific elements that you're trying to test for, especially in the classroom, so that you can see the granularity of the elements that you're trying to test. I'm going to have them listed and then see how well they're doing with those specific elements. That's all for this chapter, and I do thank y'all for spending a little time here listening. I hope you enjoyed the Khan Academy presentation there by Salman Khan. I do recommend that you go look at this. Here's the title. It's an excellent presentation, and it does impact, I believe, it does impact what's going to be happening in education in the future.